Imagine you're a parent sending your child off on a school field trip, just like you've done a dozen times before. The permission slip is signed, the lunch is packed, and your 5-year-old is brimming with excitement to hop on the yellow school bus with their friends. It's supposed to be a simple day at the lake, filled with laughter, learning, and maybe a little mud. But hours later, the unthinkable happens. The bus never returns. No phone calls. No updates. Just silence. Now picture this. 8 weeks later, a lone fisherman out on the same quiet lake casts his line into the fog and reels in something that instantly changes the course of the investigation. Something that answers questions, but raises far more terrifying ones. You're about to step into one of the most chilling, unsolved mysteries in recent memory, and the twist? It begins in a place that should have been the safest in the world, a kindergarten classroom. Before we dive in, let me be honest with you. You clicked on this video for one reason. You want answers. What happened to those children? Where did the teachers go? How does a whole field trip just vanish without a trace? And most importantly, what did the fishermen find that shocked investigators, families, and even hardened detectives to their core? I promise you, we're going to uncover everything. No filler. No dragging it out. Just the full, spine-tingling truth, but only if you stay with me until the very end, because trust me, the final moments will leave your jaw on the floor. If you miss even one piece, you're not getting the full story. So sit tight, grab something to drink, and stay focused. What you're about to hear is a real-life puzzle that has baffled law enforcement, paralyzed a small town in Colorado, and triggered online theories that range from government cover-ups to the supernatural. But here's the thing, this story isn't about conspiracy. It's about people. Families. Children. A town's peace shattered in one morning. And the quiet hero who unearthed something no one was prepared for. Let's go back to the start. The town of Juniper Falls, Colorado, population just under 6,000, was the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked and knew every face on Main Street. Nestled between the Rockies and miles of untouched wilderness, it was postcard perfect, the kind of town where kids still played outside until the streetlights came on. At the heart of the town was Maple Hill Elementary, a modest K-5 school built in the early 70s. Every spring, the kindergarten class took the same field trip to Fern Lake, a local nature spot just 20 minutes away. There was nothing unusual about that April morning. The sky was clear. The teacher, Miss Caitlin Morris, age 27, was cheerful as ever. 3 parent volunteers joined her. There were 17 children total. 17 beautiful, innocent 5-year-olds who boarded the bus, waved goodbye to their parents, and then vanished. No call from the bus driver. No radio transmission. No cries for help. The school expected the group back by 2:30. When they didn't return, administrators assumed they'd gotten delayed in the woods. It wasn't until 4:15 that a secretary dialed the sheriff's office, just to be safe. The first search teams arrived at Fern Lake by sundown. But what they found, or rather, what they didn't find, stunned them. The parking lot was empty. No bus. No tire tracks. No sign anyone had even arrived. No backpacks. No juice boxes. Not even a crumpled napkin. The lake, surrounded by dense trees and steep hills, was hauntingly still. A place once filled with birdsong and the chatter of picnicking families suddenly felt wrong. Eerily wrong. As if it had swallowed something it shouldn't have. Within 24 hours, every resource was deployed: drones, search dogs, thermal imaging, even underwater sonar. But nothing turned up. It was as if the entire group had evaporated. National headlines exploded with keywords like mysterious disappearance, missing school bus, Colorado tragedy, and unsolved field trip case. Reddit theories went viral. Was it a cult? A kidnapping ring? A rogue bus driver? Or something even darker? Police interviews revealed nothing unusual. No one had grudges. No strange behavior. Even the security cam footage from the school showed the children boarding the bus normally. The bus driver, Leonard Pike, had been with the school for 11 years and had a spotless record. Miss Morris was beloved by students and parents alike. But here's where things get weird. The GPS tracker on the bus. It pinged one last time, at 9:41 a.m., then went completely dark just half a mile from the lake. Investigators searched that area for weeks. Not a trace. Not a footprint. Nothing. Families waited.
Prayed.
Some moved away. Others refused to leave, clinging to hope that somehow their babies would return. Candlelight vigils were held every Friday. National news faded, but for Juniper Falls, the pain never left. Then, on week 8, exactly 56 days after the disappearance, someone finally broke the silence. It wasn't a detective. It wasn't a search party volunteer. It was an old man named Walter Griggs, a retired factory worker who had lived in Juniper Falls for nearly 40 years. Walter wasn't part of the investigation. He wasn't seeking attention. He was just fishing. A peaceful day at Fern Lake. Early morning. Thick fog curling over the surface like ghosts in the mist. His line had barely been in the water 10 minutes when he snagged something. At first, he thought it was driftwood. Then it started to move. He pulled harder. Whatever it was heavy.
Slick. Cold.
Walter later told police his hands shook before he even saw what it was. He knew something wasn't right. When he finally got it to the surface, he let out a scream so loud, a jogger on the other side of the lake heard him and called 911. Walter had hooked something wrapped in a child's jacket, bright red, size XS. And inside that jacket? Something that no one was ready to see. Something that cracked the case wide open and sparked a whole new horror that no one in Juniper Falls ever imagined possible. Now, I know you want to know what Walter found, and I'm going to tell you. But to understand what it means, you need to know what happened before that discovery. Because the most disturbing part of this story isn't what was found, it's how it all connects to something that started months earlier. Something the town ignored. Something the school board buried. And something that could explain why those kids never came home. You're about to meet the people who were there. The janitor who saw something in the boiler room he was told to forget. The mother who received a voicemail from her daughter, hours after the disappearance. And the substitute teacher who quit after one day, shaken, pale, and unwilling to talk about what she'd seen during recess. This is the part no one wants to talk about. The part the media glossed over. But it's also the part that matters most. So hang on. We're about to dive deeper. Into the lake, into the woods, and into a story so tangled, so unsettling, and so eerily real, that once you hear the truth, you won't be able to sleep tonight. And remember this, it all started with a field trip, but it's what happened before and after that will truly haunt you. And what Walter saw next, just moments after calling for help. It wasn't just a clue. It was a message. One that no parent should ever have to receive. Walter Griggs hadn't planned on fishing that morning. In fact, he hadn't fished in nearly 2 years. Not since his wife passed away. They used to go together every Sunday like clockwork, always to Fern Lake, always the same little cove near the rocks. After she died, Walter locked the tackle box and shoved it into the attic, refusing to so much as glance at the rod in the garage. But on that particular morning, something strange stirred him from sleep before dawn. He couldn't explain why, but he felt pulled to the lake, as if something was calling him back. He brewed his coffee in silence, dusted off the old pole without even realizing it, and by 6:15 a.m., he was driving toward a place he'd sworn never to return to alone. Later, investigators would ask him why he went back. Why that morning? Why after so long? He didn't have a clear answer. All he could say was that he woke up with an ache in his chest that didn't feel like grief. It felt like urgency. Walter wasn't the type to believe in omens. But even he admitted something about the air felt heavy that morning, thick like molasses. There were no birds, no wind, not even the buzz of insects. Just a glassy, unnatural stillness across the lake, like the world itself was holding its breath. The first tug on his line had made his heart skip, but it was the texture, the slick, cloth-wrapped shape, that told him this was no fish. And once he saw the red jacket surface, soaked and tangled in weeds, he froze. It wasn't just any jacket. It was one the town had seen before, worn by Lily Thompson, one of the missing kindergartners. Her mother, Amanda, had shared photos of it during the first press conference. She loves this jacket. Won't go anywhere without it, she'd said through tears. Walter didn't need a label to recognize it. The color was unmistakable. That bright cherry red had haunted Juniper Falls for nearly 2 months. Police cordoned off the lake within the hour. Forensics arrived by noon. Divers were sent into the water, while drone teams scanned the tree lines and shoreline. The object inside the jacket turned out to be a small bundle of what officials called organic material. That's all they said publicly. The rest was sealed under investigation. But off the record, one deputy, new to the force and clearly shaken, let something slip. What they found wasn't a body. It was a part of something that had been cut clean, almost surgically, and wrapped carefully in plastic before being inserted into the jacket. There was no blood, no sign of struggle, just precision. And that, detectives said, was what frightened them most. As the investigation reignited, suspicion spread like wildfire. But not everyone wanted it back in the spotlight. A few members of the school board, particularly a man named Derek Vale, who had been principal of Maple Hill Elementary for almost 15 years, were pushing for silence. Derek insisted the school had done everything by protocol, that the field trip had been approved, and that no stone had been left unturned during the initial search. But Walter didn't buy it. Nor did several parents who'd been growing uneasy about the school's behavior in the weeks before the trip. One mother, Kelsey Rivera, told local reporters her son had complained about weird stuff happening during recess, teachers yelling at kids not to play near the trees, classrooms suddenly closing early for maintenance, and one bizarre incident where students were abruptly moved to the cafeteria for the entire afternoon without explanation. Another father, Greg Bauer, claimed he received a phone call from the school nurse telling him his daughter had fallen and hit her head, but when he arrived to pick her up, no injury was visible, and the nurse on duty insisted no such call had been made. The deeper investigators dug, the stranger it all became. Records showed that just 2 months before the disappearance, Maple Hill had quietly replaced several staff members, including the assistant principal and a full-time counselor. No reasons were given, and none of them had left forwarding addresses. When detectives reached out, 2 couldn't be located. One had disconnected their phone. The other had moved states overnight. The timing struck everyone as suspicious, especially when it was revealed that a complaint had been filed anonymously weeks before the field trip, alleging that unauthorized individuals were entering the school grounds after hours. Security footage showed nothing. Cameras had reportedly been under repair at the time. Then came the voicemail. Amanda Thompson, Lily's mother, received it 1 week after the children vanished. It came from an unlisted number, time-stamped 3:12 a.m. The voice was quiet, almost distorted. But what it said chilled her to the core. "Mommy, we're not supposed to talk, but I miss you." That was it. A few seconds of static, then silence. Investigators traced the call, but the signal had bounced through so many relays it was nearly impossible to locate. What disturbed authorities most was how Amanda never went public with the voicemail. She was told to keep it quiet by someone on the school board, told it was probably just a cruel prank. But Amanda had the recording saved, and she played it for the lead investigator privately. He confirmed what she already knew in her gut. That was Lily's voice. And still, the theories kept growing. Some believed the children had wandered off into the woods and gotten lost, but that didn't explain the missing bus. Others were convinced it was a mass kidnapping, but there were no ransom notes, no demands, no sightings. A few pointed to a local man, Kyle Bennett, who had previously been arrested for trespassing near Fern Lake with a trunk full of survival gear and children's books. He had a record, minor offenses mostly, but a reputation for being unhinged. Yet even after being interrogated for 6 hours, Kyle didn't crack. His alibi checked out. But when asked why he kept returning to the lake, he simply said, "Because they're still out there." What did he mean? He wouldn't say. There was also the bus driver, Leonard Pike. His name kept surfacing, mostly because of one strange detail. His background check had been flagged in 2017 due to incomplete documentation. The school had brushed it off, citing a clerical error. But when the investigators went back to verify his past, they found something even stranger. No records of Leonard Pike existed before 2009. No high school. No driver's license before that year. No family. Nothing. It was as if he simply appeared one day, fully formed. People remembered him being kind, polite,
Quiet.
but distant. He never attended school events, never spoke much to other faculty. He did his job and left. But on that April morning, he was the last adult seen with those children. And he hasn't been seen since. As this new wave of uncertainty swept through Juniper Falls, people began to whisper about an old rumor, one that had long been dismissed as backwoods folklore. It spoke of something beneath Fern Lake. Not a creature, not a killer, but something older. Something that drew people in and didn't let them go. Locals had half-joked about the Whisper Tree, a twisted, ancient oak that once stood on the edge of the water before it was cut down in the early 90s. Campfire stories claimed it was cursed, that anyone who sat beneath it too long would begin to hear voices calling from the water. Just tales, of course. At least, that's what everyone said until now. Now, nothing feels like a joke anymore. Not the strange fog that rolls in every morning. Not the animals that have stopped returning to the lake. And not the fact that even with sonar and drones, no trace of the school bus has ever been found, not even a bolt or tire tread. It's as if it was never there to begin with. And yet, we know it was. And then came the second discovery. 6 days after Walter's find, another local, this time a teenage hiker, reported hearing strange music near the far side of the lake.
Faint.
Melodic. Like a lullaby. And when she went to investigate, she found something hanging from a tree branch 20 feet above the waterline. A child's shoe.
Clean.
Untouched by dirt or rain. And tucked inside the shoe a photograph. A blurry image of the children on the bus, taken from behind, as if the photographer was outside, watching them through the back window. Whatever this is, it's no accident. And the deeper we go, the darker it becomes.
So stay close.
We haven't even scratched the surface. And what's coming next will make you question everything you thought you understood about this story. Just when it seemed like the town was finally on the edge of a breakthrough, things started to fall apart, slowly at first, like threads unraveling in silence, and then all at once in a storm of confusion, lost leads, and vanished files. Walter Griggs, now reluctantly thrust into the spotlight after his grisly discovery, found himself drawn into the center of the mystery. People began treating him like he had answers, like his return to Fern Lake was fate and not just a strange coincidence. Reporters hounded him for interviews, neighbors whispered about him in grocery store aisles, and conspiracy forums online started tagging him in theories that labeled him everything from a psychic to a suspect. But Walter wasn't chasing attention. He was chasing a feeling. The same feeling that pulled him back to the lake that morning still tugged at him, stronger now. Like something unseen wanted him to look deeper. But that instinct was met with resistance at every turn. The first obstacle came just days after the second discovery. Walter had handed over the red jacket and the plastic-wrapped remains to police, expecting that forensics would release a full report. But within 48 hours, the evidence was labeled as misplaced during transfer. An internal error, they claimed. It was logged, sealed, and somehow vanished. Walter didn't buy it for a second. Neither did Detective Maya Wren, one of the few officers in the department who still seemed genuinely interested in the truth. She'd already begun noticing irregularities in the case files, missing timestamps, redacted witness statements, and surveillance footage with strange audio gaps. One particular camera feed, facing the school's west lot on the morning of the field trip, suddenly looped for 7 minutes, right at the exact time the bus pulled away. It's like someone scrubbed it. Maya whispered to Walter late one night in the parking lot behind the station. And they want us to believe it's just a glitch. But things got stranger. The night Maya confided in him, Walter returned home to find his front door slightly ajar. Nothing appeared stolen, but the attic was open. The place he hadn't stepped foot in since before that fateful fishing trip. His old tackle box was moved, its contents neatly arranged on the floor. Sitting on top, in perfect stillness, was a crumpled school photo of Lily Thompson, one that hadn't been released to the public. How it got there, and why it was inside his locked home. No one could explain. The next morning, Maya didn't show up to work. Her badge was found in her mailbox, keys still in her ignition. She'd vanished without a trace. And once again, the official statement read like a broken record. No signs of foul play. The harder Walter pushed for answers, the more resistance he faced, not just from officials, but from people he trusted. Amanda Thompson, once eager to share what she knew, suddenly pulled away. She stopped answering calls. Her house went dark for days. And when Walter finally confronted her at the edge of her driveway, she refused to open the door. Through the glass, her voice cracked. "They told me to stop," she whispered. "They know everything."
About the voicemail. About me.
"I didn't tell you the whole truth, Walter."
I
can't." Before he could respond, the porch lights cut off. The curtains dropped. And Amanda was gone again, retreating into a silence that felt rehearsed, forced, even. Then came the tip that changed everything. An anonymous email with no subject, no sender, just a single sentence. "Look into the 1996 accident. Maple Hill buried it." Attached was an image of a yellowed newspaper clipping, barely legible, with a headline that read, "Tragedy strikes Juniper Falls. 3 children dead after unexplained school bus crash." Walter read it 3 times, eyes wide. The article claimed the bus had veered off a rural road and plunged into a quarry, except that quarry was filled in years ago, and no one in town ever talked about it. The article named the bus driver, Leonard Pike. The same name, the same man, but the date didn't match. If the article was real, then Leonard Pike had been involved in another tragic accident almost 30 years ago. But according to public records, Pike didn't even exist before 2009. Walter printed the clipping and brought it to the town archives, hoping to pull up the full story. But when he got there, the digital index showed no record of any incident in 1996 involving a school bus or any deaths. The librarian, an elderly woman named Ruth who had worked there for decades, froze when she saw the headline. She didn't say anything at first, just stared at the screen as if it had brought back something she'd tried very hard to forget. Then, almost trembling, she leaned in close and muttered, "I remember that day. It was raining hard. My nephew was one of the kids on that bus." Walter's heart dropped. "What happened to him?" he asked. She shook her head. "He didn't die. He just changed. After that day, he wouldn't speak. Just drew pictures of trees. Always the same tree. Over and over. The one by Fern Lake." Everywhere Walter turned, pieces of the past kept colliding with the present. And yet, no one seemed to want the truth uncovered. Not the town. Not the authorities. Not even the families of the missing kids. It was as if something or someone had convinced them that forgetting was safer, that remembering carried consequences. But Walter wasn't ready to stop. Not after what he'd seen. Not after what had been left in his attic. Then, one evening, he returned from the library to find a car parked outside his house. A black SUV, engine still running, with tinted windows that reflected only shadows. A man stood beside it, dressed in a gray coat with no markings. He never approached, just watched. And when Walter stepped toward him, the man got in the SUV and drove away without a word. But taped to the driver's side window, flapping in the wind, was a single sheet of paper. Walter walked up, heart racing, and peeled it off. No words, just an image. It was the class photo of the missing kindergartners. Only this time there were 15 kids. There were only supposed to be 14. And the 15th child was smiling directly at the camera, eyes too wide, too dark, and face completely unrecognizable. Walter stood frozen on the side of the road, the image still fluttering slightly in his hand as if it were alive, mocking him in its silence. The 15th child, the one no one could name, whose face didn't appear in any school records or parent-submitted forms, seemed to look right through the photograph, as if watching from the other side. It wasn't just unsettling, it was wrong. The proportions of the child's face didn't sit quite right, the expression didn't match the cheerful mood of the other kids, and the shadows around its mouth and eyes gave off the impression that it had been edited in, or worse, that it had somehow inserted itself after the photo was taken. Walter tried to rationalize it, assuming it was a hoax, a sick prank by someone who knew too much about the case. But deep down, he knew this wasn't random. Someone was trying to tell him something. Or warn him. That night, across town, someone else was about to be pulled into the darkness. Sarah Camden, a former teacher at Maple Hill Elementary and once a close friend of Amanda Thompson, had been keeping to herself ever since the incident. She had quietly resigned just weeks after the children vanished, citing personal health issues. But those close to her knew the truth. She hadn't been the same since the field trip. What most didn't know, however, was that Sarah had been the one who recommended Fern Lake as the trip destination. It was her idea, her signature on the forms, and her name listed as the emergency backup chaperone, even though she didn't end up going. That detail had never sat right with Walter, and now it was about to come crashing back. At 2:17 a.m., Sarah was awakened by the sound of her old answering machine clicking on in the living room. She hadn't used it in years. The house was dark, cold, too still. As she crept down the hall, the machine beeped again. Then again. 3 messages, all from the same unknown number. But it was the voice in the first message that made her knees go weak. A child's whisper.
A name.
Over and over again. Miss Camden, it's me, it's me, it's me. The second message was static. Long, humming static that stretched on for over a minute before abruptly cutting off with a sharp sound, almost like something scratching glass. But the third message was the worst. It was the field trip roll call, the exact recording Sarah had made on her phone to check each student into the bus that morning. Every name read clearly, until the end, when a voice, not hers, added a final name in a low, inhuman tone. And me. Sarah backed away from the machine, shaking, when she saw it, a white envelope tucked neatly under the door. Inside was the same photo Walter had received. The class picture. 15 kids. By morning, Sarah had packed a bag and vanished. Her neighbors said she left in a panic, muttering something about the woods and a voice in the floorboards. She hadn't contacted anyone, not Amanda, not her sister in Ohio, not the school. Walter learned of her disappearance when Amanda finally returned one of his calls, her voice flat and tired.
She's gone.
I think she knew more than she let on. But she was scared. Terrified, Walter. And I think she was being watched. The deeper Walter dug, the more it seemed like reality was breaking apart. The investigation had twisted into something far more sinister than a tragic accident. New questions began to surface. Who took the altered photo? Why was Sarah's original field trip list suddenly missing from school records? And more disturbingly, why were only 14 students reported missing when clearly there was evidence of a 15th? Walter tried to raise these concerns to law enforcement again, but the response was different this time. Colder. Less tolerant. A young officer, one Walter hadn't seen before, leaned in and said, "Let it go. Not everything needs to be understood. Some things just happen." Around that same time, rumors began spreading through the town's fringe circles. Online forums, Facebook groups, and even TikTok creators were now obsessed with the idea of a ghost child tied to the Fern Lake disappearances. Some claimed to have seen the mysterious child standing near the lake at sunrise. Others posted grainy footage of a figure darting between trees, always just out of focus. Hashtags like #FernLakeGhost, #15thChild, and #VanishingKindergarten began trending, drawing attention from paranormal investigators, true crime junkies, and even conspiracy theory YouTubers who started digging into the town's buried history. The buzz turned the tragedy into a nationwide obsession, but for Walter, it only brought more confusion. The more people speculated, the more misinformation spread, making the truth harder to isolate. Then came the twist no one expected. A video surfaced from a hunter's trail cam, taken roughly 3 weeks after the kids had vanished. It showed nothing at first, just static forest, branches swaying in the wind, and then a brief flash of movement. A small figure, no taller than a child, stepping barefoot into frame. The child turned toward the camera, stared, and raised a finger to its lips in a gesture of silence. What chilled viewers wasn't just the eeriness of the footage, but what came after. The timestamp was corrupted. The digital feed skipped backward 5 seconds and then repeated itself. Only this time, the child was gone, but a small, black bird now sat in the same spot. A bird with a tiny red ribbon tied around its leg. The same ribbon Amanda had described Lily wearing the day she vanished. Walter watched that video over and over. Something wasn't right. These weren't just coincidences, they were connections. Threads in a larger pattern that someone was trying desperately to keep hidden. And it became clear that the key to unlocking the entire mystery might not lie in the lake or the woods, but in the forgotten memories of those left behind. Secrets buried so deep, not even the victims knew they held them. But what Walter didn't know, what no one could have guessed, was that someone else had just received another envelope. Not a teacher, not a fisherman, but a student, a middle schooler, older sibling of one of the missing kindergartners. And inside was a photograph, one that hadn't been seen before. It was taken from behind the bus. And in the window reflection, you could see the driver. Only it wasn't Leonard Pike. Walter had always considered himself a logical man. A man of quiet patterns and peaceful routines. But as the days dragged deeper into chaos, those patterns began to decay, slipping away like sand through open fingers. What once grounded him, his home, his memories, his belief in truth and order, was now betraying him. And it all came to a head the night he realized he was being followed. It started subtly at first. The creak of gravel shifting behind him on a morning walk. A pair of headlights lingering too long in his rear-view mirror. Shadows outside his window, at odd hours. He told himself it was nerves, fatigue from weeks of obsessing over clues and dead ends. But when he came home one evening to find every photo in his hallway turned face down, each frame untouched but each image reversed, he knew this was no accident. Someone had been inside. Again. But they hadn't taken anything, not physically. They had left something else behind. A feeling. A presence. Like someone had watched him, not just in the moment, but for far longer than he realized. Later that same night, as he scrolled through old texts looking for a message Amanda had sent weeks ago, his phone buzzed. A new message. Unknown number. Just one word. Stop. Beneath it was a photo of Walter himself, standing in his backyard, wearing the exact clothes he had on now. The photo was time-stamped 30 minutes earlier. He dropped the phone. His breathing quickened, heart thudding so loudly he swore the floorboards were vibrating. He raced through his house, locking windows, checking closets, switching lights on and off in a panicked rhythm. For the first time since this began, he felt helpless. Whoever was behind this, they were close. Closer than he'd ever imagined. And they were watching. The next blow came swiftly, mercilessly. Amanda Thompson was gone. One moment she was at her home, answering a video call with Walter, her face pale but focused, saying she had something new, something big. The next morning, her house was empty. Not ransacked, not disturbed. Just vacant. Her keys left on the counter. Her phone still charging by the kitchen wall. The back door wide open, curtain fluttering in the breeze like someone had left in a rush. But there was no sign of struggle. No note. No trace. Except for one item Walter spotted taped to her bathroom mirror, a child's watercolor painting. A bus driving into a dark, crooked forest, with tiny stick figures crying behind the windows. In the corner, written in shaky red crayon, were the words, "He never left the woods." Walter stared at it for nearly 10 minutes before he could bring himself to speak. That phrase had come up before. He'd read it once, in a police report from the 1996 incident. It had been written in the margins of a counselor's file, describing one of the surviving children. A boy who refused to talk to anyone, who only repeated the same sentence over and over. He never left the woods. Back then, they assumed it referred to a classmate who had died in the crash. But now, that same phrase had returned, decades later, connected to a new set of children who had also vanished on a school trip. The walls of Walter's mind were closing in. His paranoia became a companion, whispering doubts with every decision he made. Was Amanda truly missing? Or was she silenced? Was Sarah's voicemail real? Or had someone engineered it to trap him deeper in the narrative? Even Maya, the detective who had once seemed like an ally, had she gone missing on her own? Or had her role shifted into something more sinister? Worse yet, Walter's body began betraying him too. He started waking with deep scratches on his forearms, ones he couldn't explain. His sleep was haunted by vivid dreams, dark trees, dripping water, the muffled cries of children calling his name. And always, at the end, he would see the same twisted face. The 15th child. That smile. Those eyes. But it wasn't just dreams anymore. One afternoon, while reviewing the footage from the trail cam video again, trying to spot anything missed, he noticed something else. In the top corner of the screen, nearly obscured by branches, was a second figure. Taller.
Still.
Watching the child from a distance. It didn't move. It didn't blink. But in the final frame, just as the timestamp glitched, its head turned slightly toward the camera. Walter rushed to enhance the image, adjusting the contrast and light levels until he could make out the faintest detail. A shape on the figure's chest.
A badge.
It was a school security badge. Maple Hill Elementary. And scrawled across it in faded print, L. Pike. Leonard Pike was dead. Or so everyone believed. But if the man in that image was him, if he had somehow survived, disappeared, and returned, then none of this was over. It was just beginning. And worse, Pike might not have been working alone. Walter's thoughts spiraled. He was starting to believe that everything about Fern Lake, Maple Hill, even the school itself, had been part of something larger, something reaching back decades, feeding off trauma and silence. It wasn't just a tragic mystery anymore. It was a system, a cycle. And now Walter was trapped inside it. That night, Walter opened his front door to find a small envelope resting on the doormat. No stamp, no return address. Just his name, written in a child's scrawl. He opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a single Polaroid photo. It showed his house, taken from the woods behind it, and in the window upstairs was a child's silhouette, standing in the room he had just left. Walter didn't hesitate. His heart thundered as he bounded up the stairs, each step a drumbeat of rising dread. The hallway was eerily silent. The door to his upstairs office cracked open just as he'd left it. He moved quickly, gripping the old wooden banister, trying to shake the image from his mind, the silhouette in the window, the small figure watching, waiting. He burst into the room. Nothing. Empty. The blinds fluttered slightly from the wind seeping through the cracks, but no sign of anyone. No child. No footprints on the carpet. No open windows. Just the unsettling stillness of a house that had seen too much. He turned to leave, then stopped cold. On his desk, right where he had left the field trip documents, was a notebook. Not his. It was old, stained, its leather cover warped from years of wear. He didn't remember seeing it there before. Slowly, he opened it. The first page was filled with neat, looping cursive in black ink, dated October 17, 1996. It wasn't a school record or an old report, it was a journal. And as he read the entries, realization struck like a lightning bolt. The author wasn't a teacher, a parent, or a student. It was Leonard Pike. The pages detailed events leading up to the 1996 field trip, the same trip where a different set of children vanished under mysterious circumstances almost 30 years ago. But Pike's words weren't the ramblings of a man driven mad. They were calculated, purposeful. He described feeling drawn to Fern Lake, compelled by dreams, whispers in the dark, strange sightings of a child who appeared and disappeared at will. He wrote of finding carvings in the trees near the lake, symbols he couldn't decipher, voices only he could hear. And then came the most disturbing revelation. Pike didn't just witness what happened. He facilitated it. Walter's hands shook as he flipped to the next page, where a faded Polaroid was taped. Another class photo. Another group of children. But this one had only 13 kids. 2 were missing. And in the space between them, written in thick red ink, were the words, "They never learn. But he always remembers." Walter stumbled back from the desk, nearly knocking over the chair. This wasn't just about the recent disappearances. It was a cycle. A ritual. And Leonard Pike hadn't been a victim. He had been the guardian of it. Suddenly, the puzzle pieces rearranged themselves in Walter's mind. The warnings. The altered photos. The mysteriously erased records. Pike hadn't died in that fire as everyone believed. He had vanished into the woods to protect something. Or perhaps someone. And the children? They weren't taken by a man or a monster in the woods. They were part of something older, darker, an offering maybe. A covenant. Each time the town forgot, it happened again. But this time someone was trying to stop it. Or redirect it. As if on cue, Walter's phone buzzed. A call from an unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. The voice on the other end wasn't a stranger. It was Maya, the detective he thought had disappeared. But she didn't sound like herself. Her tone was different, calm, but cold, detached in a way that sent a chill through him. You weren't supposed to get that notebook, she said. They're watching now. Walter's breath caught.
Who is? Who are they?
There was a pause. You're asking the wrong question, Maya replied. You should be asking why you were chosen. Before he could respond, the line went dead. That one sentence shattered everything he thought he understood. Why he was chosen. He hadn't been investigating the mystery, he was in it. All along. It explained the warnings, the photo in the window, even the messages. Someone wasn't just trying to scare him, they were steering him, pushing him toward the truth. But if Maya had changed sides, or had always been playing a different game, then who else had been lying? He returned to the notebook, flipping to the last page. There, scribbled in a shaky hand, was a final note from Pike. He doesn't come for the children. He comes for the ones who see him. Walter stared at those words, horror blooming in his chest. All this time, he thought he was searching for answers, trying to bring the children home. But maybe, just maybe, the mystery was never about the children. Maybe they were already gone. And the real target, the real purpose of it all, was something else entirely. And then, from the corner of his eye, he saw it again. In the reflection of the window across the room, behind him, stood a figure.
Smiling.
Waiting. Walter didn't turn around immediately. He couldn't. Every instinct screamed at him to flee, to deny what he'd just seen reflected in the window, but he forced himself to breathe, to stay grounded. The air behind him grew heavy, like someone or something was drawing it in, feeding off his fear. And just as he gathered the courage to whirl around, the reflection disappeared. Nothing was there. No one. The hallway was empty. The house returned to stillness. But he knew he hadn't imagined it. It was real. Whatever had been watching him wasn't just toying with his mind anymore. It was closing in. That night, Walter sat alone in the dark with the notebook open across his lap, replaying everything. He kept circling back to Maya's words. Why you were chosen. It gnawed him. He thought of Amanda, of the look on her face when she said she'd found something big, of how her house had been left so perfectly undisturbed. What if she hadn't been taken? What if she had left? What if Amanda was part of it all? The idea seemed impossible. She was one of the few people who believed him. But as the pieces clicked into place, something deeper settled in his chest. The fear that this wasn't just about a conspiracy or some hidden evil in the woods. This was personal. Someone close to him knew more than they had ever let on. The following morning, unable to keep it bottled up any longer, Walter drove to Amanda's childhood home, the one listed on her old driver's license. It was a long shot, a desperate move, but something told him he'd find answers there. When he arrived, the house looked like it hadn't been lived in for years. The paint was peeling, the yard overgrown. But inside, he found something that stopped him cold, a photo album, old and dusty, left on the kitchen table as if someone had meant for it to be found. And in it were pictures of Amanda and Leonard Pike. Together. Smiling. Arm in arm. Walter's stomach sank. He flipped faster. Amanda as a teenager, standing at Fern Lake, wearing a camp counselor badge. A handwritten note tucked between the pages read, "We keep them safe. We keep them hidden. Until it's time." His fingers trembled as he pieced it together. Amanda wasn't investigating the disappearances. She'd been involved from the start. And she wasn't alone. This was generational. This was planned. Driving home in a fog of betrayal, Walter nearly missed the figure standing on the roadside. He slammed the brakes and swerved. It was Sarah.
Alive.
Barefoot, covered in mud, her eyes wide but distant. She didn't say a word, just held out her hand and placed a USB drive into his palm. Then, without another word, she turned and walked into the woods, disappeared into the trees before he could stop her. At home, Walter plugged in the drive, unsure what he was about to uncover.
It was a single video file.
Grainy, time-stamped 2 days before the kids went missing. It showed the inside of the school's boiler room. Dim, shadowy, the camera shaky. Voices echoed. Familiar ones. Amanda.
Pike.
And another he hadn't heard before. It was Maya. They were arguing about timing, about which group would be taken, about sacrifices and selection. And then, Pike said something that chilled Walter's blood. Walter's family has already been marked. He just doesn't remember. Walter recoiled. Family? Marked? He paused the video, rewound it again and again, letting the words sink in. Pike wasn't speaking metaphorically. Walter's family, his bloodline, was part of this. Maybe it was why he was drawn to Fern Lake. Why he couldn't walk away. Why the shadows seemed to know his name. It wasn't random. It was in him. And now, he had to decide what to do with that truth. Later that night, he received a call. It was Amanda. Her voice calm, emotionless. "You don't understand what we're trying to protect," she said. "You can end this, Walter. But not by fighting it. The children, they're not lost. They're safe. They're chosen. But if you keep pushing, if you expose everything, they'll all be taken. And so will you." Walter sat in silence, the weight of it pressing in. She was offering him a choice. Walk away, keep their secret, and the children would be spared. Or expose the truth, and doom them all. His heart ached, not just with fear, but with fury. The people he trusted were monsters hiding behind masks of care and community. And now he had to choose between justice and survival. That night, Walter wrote out everything he knew. He made copies of every file, every photo, every voice message, and locked them away in a fireproof box. He drafted a letter. If something happened to him, someone would know. Someone would continue the fight. But just as he finished sealing the envelope, his phone buzzed. A new photo. It was of his sister.
Bound. Crying.
And behind her, in the shadows, the silhouette of a child.
Smiling.
Waiting. Walter didn't sleep that night. He couldn't. The image of his sister, terror in her eyes, the helplessness of being dragged into something he still didn't fully understand, haunted him. He stared at his phone until dawn. The photo burned into his brain like a scar. The child in the background wasn't just a threat anymore. It was a message. A signature. It meant this wasn't over, not even close. It meant they were watching his every move. And it confirmed what he feared most. This conspiracy was far more widespread than he'd ever imagined. He wasn't just battling a cover-up, he was battling an entire system that had been protecting itself for decades. By morning, he knew he had no choice left but to go public. He drove straight to the local news station in Jackson Hollow, the nearest town with a media presence, hoping anyone would listen. He asked for a reporter by name, a woman he'd met briefly once at a town hall meeting, Elise Romero. Smart, skeptical, and famously persistent. He thought if he handed her everything, the notebook, the USB drive, the photos, she'd blow the lid off the whole operation. But when he arrived, she wasn't there. The receptionist looked up his name and narrowed her eyes. "She's not taking meetings today," she said quickly. "You should leave." Walter felt his stomach twist. Something was wrong. He pushed back, insisting, begging, until finally someone whispered that Elise had been suspended suddenly, and without warning just 2 days ago.
No one knew why.
But Walter knew. She'd gotten too close. And now she was gone. He stood in the parking lot, phone clutched in his hand, and realized there was no cavalry coming. No media savior. No government whistleblower to swoop in. Whoever was behind this had reach. They could silence people, alter records, erase evidence, and do it in plain sight. Walter was already in too deep, and now he was alone. He didn't even make it back to his car before a black SUV rolled slowly up the street. Tinted windows. No plates. It stopped, idled, then slowly rolled forward again, just enough to let him know he was being watched. Followed. Controlled. He turned and walked fast, cutting through alleyways, back streets, changing direction 3 times before slipping into an old cafe where he used to study in college. He sat in the far back, head low, trying to catch his breath. It wasn't just Amanda. It wasn't just Maya. It wasn't just Pike. This was a network. A chain of people all bound by something he didn't yet understand. And then, just as his panic reached a breaking point, his phone buzzed again. A new message. No number. Just a file. A video. He opened it. It was a live feed. Of his sister. She was in a basement. Concrete walls.
Pipes.
A single hanging bulb. And she wasn't alone. Amanda stood behind her, arms folded, calm and collected like she was leading a board meeting. Her voice came through the phone speaker, crisp and cool. "You need to come home, Walter," she said. "You need to remember who you are." Walter sat frozen. The implications sank in. This wasn't about information. It wasn't about exposing a secret.
It was about him.
His family.
His history.
They weren't just threatening his sister. They were inviting him. They wanted him to come back. Because he belonged.
But that made no sense.
He didn't remember anything. His childhood was ordinary, average, even. His parents were long gone. His childhood home had been demolished after a fire. He'd grown up believing he was a normal kid from a small town with no skeletons in the closet. But what if his past had been rewritten? What if the fire that destroyed his childhood home wasn't an accident? What if his family had been part of this for generations, and his mind had been forcibly wiped of the truth? A part of him wanted to run. Just vanish. Go off the grid. But then he remembered the children. The terrified faces. Sarah's mud-covered body appearing out of nowhere. The notebook. Pike's journal. It all pointed to something deeper. Something older. And if he ran now, they'd vanish again. The cycle would continue. And he would be complicit. He called the only person he had left, Detective Ron Behrens. A retired officer who had tried to blow the whistle on a missing persons case from the late 80s. Behrens had been silenced, discredited, forced into early retirement. But he had always believed there was more to the lake, more to the missing kids. Walter asked to meet him, and, to his surprise, Behrens agreed. They met at an abandoned water tower just outside town, neutral ground. Behrens looked older, worn down by years of being ignored, but his eyes were sharp. Walter told him everything. Showed him the photos, the video, the journal. Behrens didn't even blink. "I tried to stop it once," he said. "Back when I was young. I got too close. They took my nephew. Told me if I ever spoke again, the rest of my family would disappear." Walter leaned in. "Who are they?" Behrens shook his head. "It's not just a group of people, Walter.
It's a pact.
Between towns. Officials. Families. 4 generations. Something was buried in those woods a long time ago. And every few decades, someone has to pay the price to keep it there." Walter felt his world spin. It wasn't just a cult. It wasn't just a secret society. It was an agreement, one that had sustained peace in the region for decades. At the cost of children. At the cost of truth. The field trips weren't accidents. They were part of the deal. And Pike? Amanda? They weren't renegades. They were guardians of that deal. Then Behrens dropped the final bombshell. "You were supposed to be taken too," he said. "Back in '97. Your name was on the list. But someone close to you faked your death in the fire. That's why you don't remember. They erased you. Hid you. But now you're back. And the system wants to balance itself again." Walter reeled. He wasn't just uncovering the conspiracy. He was the conspiracy. His very survival had thrown off a balance that had existed for decades. And now, with the children missing, with secrets unraveling, with the system exposed, he was the loose end they had to tie up. Before he could respond, Behrens went stiff. His eyes widened. A dart, silent and quick, embedded in his neck. He collapsed without a sound. Walter turned just in time to see a figure in a mask vanish into the tree line. The conspiracy wasn't just responding anymore, IT was hunting. Walter's heart pounded in his chest as he approached the abandoned farmhouse, the last piece of the puzzle. The whole town had tried to convince him to let it go. They said it was over, that the truth was too dangerous to uncover, and that there were forces far beyond their control. But the more they tried to silence him, the more determined he became. Every single piece of the mystery, every cryptic message, every disappearing child, it all led him here. To this dilapidated house on the outskirts of Jackson Hollow, hidden just out of sight from the lake. His breath came in shallow gasps, the cold air biting at his skin as he reached for the door. But just before he touched the handle, he heard a rustle behind him. He spun around, eyes darting through the darkness, but saw nothing. Nothing but the trees, the empty road, the faint glow of a distant street lamp. His nerves were shot, but this wasn't the first time he'd felt this sense of being watched, followed, hunted. He had felt it ever since the moment he'd started digging into the town's history. Something dark, something ancient, was pulling at the edges of his sanity. He took a deep breath and forced himself to enter. Inside, the house was eerily quiet, save for the creaks of rotting wood beneath his feet. The air smelled musty, stale, as if the house had been left to decay for years. He moved cautiously through the dark hallway, every instinct screaming at him to turn back, to walk away from whatever nightmare awaited. But there was no turning back now. He had already come too far. In the center of the living room, a single table was covered with old photographs, maps, and papers that looked like they hadn't been touched in decades. The walls were lined with bookshelves, but the books were mostly faded, their pages yellowed with age. And there, in the center of it all, was a small, leather-bound journal, the final journal. The journal that Amanda had been so desperate to protect. He reached for it, his hands trembling, and opened it to the first page. His eyes scanned the words, his pulse quickening as he read. The children are not the end, but the beginning. The ritual must continue to ensure the town's survival. The price must be paid, or the lake will take its due. Walter froze. He had suspected this, but reading it in black and white made it real. The truth he had feared, the truth no one wanted to admit. The children had been part of a ritual, sacrifices to something beneath the lake, something ancient that had held Jackson Hollow in its grip for generations. And now it was his turn. Suddenly, he heard the creaking of a door behind him, followed by the low, raspy voice he had been dreading to hear. "You shouldn't have come here, Walter." He spun around to face the person who had haunted his every step, the one who had been pulling the strings all along.
Pike.
The man who had given him the answers, the man who had led him to this point, had always known the truth, but had never fully explained it. You've been part of this all along," Walter said, his voice shaking with a mixture of fear and fury. "You let them disappear. You let them sacrifice the children. You." Pike raised his hand, silencing him. "It wasn't just me, Walter. It wasn't just anyone in this town. We're all part of something bigger, something older. You were born into this. Your father, your mother, they understood what was at stake. They made a choice to protect you. But now, you're here, and you've broken the chain. You've opened the door that shouldn't have been opened." Walter's blood ran cold. "What are you saying?" "The lake," Pike said slowly, his voice almost a whisper. "The lake isn't just water, Walter. It's a gateway. And the price it demands isn't just blood. It's the soul of this town. And you, your family, you were always meant to be its keeper, its protector. But you've taken too much. You've uncovered too much. Now you're a threat." Walter stepped back, the weight of Pike's words crashing into him. All this time, all the missing children, the cryptic messages, the symbols, he had thought it was some sort of cult, a twisted conspiracy.
But it was much worse than that.
It was a pact. A centuries-old bargain that stretched far beyond Jackson Hollow, beyond anything he could have imagined. "Stop it," Walter said, his voice rising. "You're not doing this anymore. It ends tonight. Pike's eyes darkened.
You don't understand. You can't stop it.
You never could. The only way to stop it is for someone to take your place. Someone to continue the legacy. And you're the one who has to do it, Walter. You were always meant to. Walter's mind reeled. He had been brought here for a reason. He had been manipulated from the beginning. His family had been part of it all. His father, his mother, they had sacrificed everything to keep the town alive. And now, it was his turn to pay the price. You can't make me do this, Walter said, his voice trembling with defiance. I don't have to, Pike said, stepping closer, his voice barely a whisper. The lake will make you. And in that moment, the ground beneath them seemed to shift, the house groaning as if alive. The air grew heavy, and Walter could feel the weight of the ancient power that had been buried beneath Jackson Hollow for so long. The lake, the ritual, everything was connected. And as Pike's final words echoed in his ears, a deafening crash came from above. The ceiling splintered, and a dark, inky figure began to crawl through the cracks, its eyes glowing with an unearthly light. Walter's breath caught in his throat. This wasn't just a man. Pike wasn't just a man. He was the keeper of the lake. And now, Walter was the only one standing in the way of an ancient evil that had been waiting to break free. The true battle had only just begun. The smoke curled into the air like a ghost trying to flee, its wisps dancing in the moonlight above the shattered bunker as flames consumed everything that once held the secrets of Jackson Hollow's oldest curse. Walter watched it burn from the edge of the forest, his heart pounding not with fear anymore, but with the raw ache of something deeper. Grief, clarity, maybe even rebirth. His sister was safe, but changed. Her wrists still bore the bruises of the ritual that almost claimed her, and her eyes held a silence that no words could reach. She had been part of it, yes, but also a prisoner of it, raised in a belief system so twisted and generational that even she hadn't realized how far it went until it was too late. In the final moments before the fire consumed the last of the underground chamber, Amanda had turned to him with tears in her eyes and said only one thing: "Make sure this never happens again." And then she disappeared into the smoke, vanishing the same way the others had all those years ago. The children were found not far from the lake, wandering dazed but alive, some unable to speak, others repeating fragments of the same chilling phrase, "We were supposed to forget." The authorities were quick to write off the ordeal as a mass case of exposure and disorientation, citing dehydration, wild animal sightings, and stress. But Walter knew better. He had seen the drawings in their hands, the symbols scratched into bark and stone, the echoes of whispers carried in the wind at night. There was something beneath the lake, something ancient and powerful that fed on silence, secrecy, and pain. And for a long time, it had gotten exactly what it wanted. Back in town, no one wanted to talk. The mayor issued a brief statement about community healing and respect for privacy. The local church doubled down on sermons about redemption and moving forward. And Pike's name, once whispered in fear, was erased entirely, like he had never existed. But Walter refused to let the truth be buried again. He handed over the remaining pages of the journal to an investigative reporter in Memphis who agreed to publish a full exposé. He uploaded his own video testimony, timestamped footage, and the location of the bunker to multiple encrypted archives across the internet. He knew they'd try to suppress it, knew they might come for him again. But this time the story was out there. And stories, once told, don't die so easily. Weeks later, Walter stood on the edge of Lake Merrow, staring into the still water that had once held so many secrets. The trees whispered around him, as if carrying the voices of those who had been lost. He dropped the last remnant of the past, a small pendant Amanda used to wear, into the lake, watching it sink slowly, vanishing into the deep like the final piece of a puzzle that had haunted generations. Behind him, Maya stood silent, her hand in his. She had returned to the town too, but not to forget, to rebuild. She wanted to create something better for the children who had survived, to make sure they had more than just scars and nightmares. Together, they had begun renovating the old schoolhouse into a trauma center for missing and exploited youth, a place of truth in a town built on silence. And yet, the mystery lingered. Some nights, Walter would wake to the sound of water dripping where there was no leak, or see the flicker of a shadow move across the treeline when there was no wind. A part of him still wondered if the entity beneath the lake had really been destroyed, or if it had simply moved on, deeper, waiting. Because even though the bunker was gone, the symbols had begun to reappear. A child in a nearby town, 3 counties over, was found drawing the triangle within a circle in chalk on the sidewalk. When asked where she learned it, she only shrugged and said, "It's how you stay safe." The reporter in Memphis went dark a few days after her piece was published. Her last known email to Walter simply read, "It's spreading." Walter didn't know what to believe anymore. But he knew this. Some stories don't end, they echo. And sometimes the greatest danger isn't the evil you uncover, but the silence that comes after, when people choose to look away, forget, and move on. The truth about Jackson Hollow wasn't just a tragedy. It was a warning. And if no one listens, the past has a way of finding its voice again. So, if you're watching this, if you made it to the end of this story, remember this isn't just fiction. These patterns, these symbols, this silence, they're real. And if you ever find yourself near Lake Merrow or any place where too many children go missing and no one asks why, look closer. Because something may be watching, waiting, and it never forgets. Now, let me ask you something. Do you remember the last time something disappeared in your town and no one ever talked about it again? Because maybe it wasn't just a coincidence after all.